The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the familiar black railings. Among them stood Marcus Chen, a travel blogger from California who had built his reputation on getting the most unique shots possible. His followers expected something special from his London trip, and he was determined to deliver. Marcus had spent the previous evening studying the guard rotation schedules and timing their movements. He noticed a small gap in the fence near the side entrance where maintenance crews sometimes entered. The security seemed lighter there, and he calculated he could slip through, grab a selfie with one of the famous red-coated guards, and slip back out before anyone noticed. What Marcus didn't realize was that the royal guards were not the decorative figures he had imagined from movies and postcards. These were active military personnel, highly trained soldiers from elite regiments, like the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Welsh Guards. Their ceremonial duties were just one part of their role in protecting the monarchy and maintaining order. As Marcus squeezed through the gap in his designer jeans and expensive sneakers, his phone already positioned for the perfect shot, he felt a surge of excitement. His followers would go crazy for this content. The guard he approached stood perfectly still, rifle in hand, his tall bearskin hat casting a shadow over his face. Marcus raised his phone, grinning widely. The moment Marcus stepped within the guard's designated zone, everything changed. The soldier's training kicked in immediately. Without breaking his stoic expression or changing his stance, the guard issued a sharp, authoritative warning that echoed across the courtyard. Other guards immediately began moving toward their position, while security cameras swiveled to focus on the scene. Marcus, startled by the guard's commanding voice, stumbled backward, but didn't retreat far enough. He was still within the restricted area, still holding his phone up. The guard took one measured step forward, his military bearing unmistakable, and repeated his warning with even greater authority. By now, palace security personnel were approaching from multiple directions. The consequences came swiftly and decisively. Palace security officers surrounded Marcus within seconds, their radios crackling with coordinated communications. They confiscated his phone immediately, not just deleting the unauthorized photos, but conducting a complete digital investigation of his device. This process took hours and revealed his planned approach, including screenshots of palace layouts he had downloaded. Marcus found himself detained in a windowless room within the palace security complex, where officials explained the serious nature of his actions. He had violated multiple security protocols, trespassed on crown property, and potentially compromised ongoing security measures. The officers were professional but firm, making it clear that his actions could have triggered much more serious responses if circumstances had been different. The legal proceedings that followed were swift but thorough. Marcus was charged with trespassing on royal property, a specific offense under British law that carries more severe penalties than ordinary trespassing. The magistrate who heard his case was unsympathetic to his explanation that he was just trying to create content for social media. His punishment extended far beyond the courtroom. Marcus received a substantial fine that wiped out his travel budget for the next 2 years. More damaging to his career, he was banned from entering any royal property in the United Kingdom for 10 years, making future travel content from Britain nearly impossible. The story of his arrest became news itself, but not the kind of publicity he had hoped for. The incident had lasting consequences for Marcus's travel blogging career. Sponsors began questioning his judgment and professionalism, leading to canceled partnerships and lost income. His follower count actually decreased as people criticized his disrespectful behavior and poor decision-making. Instead of the viral success he had imagined, Marcus became an example of what not to do when visiting royal sites. The palace used Marcus's case as a teaching moment, releasing a statement reminding visitors that the royal guards are active soldiers with real authority to protect the monarchy. The guards themselves never broke character during the entire incident, maintaining their professional demeanor while demonstrating exactly why they have earned respect and fear in equal measure throughout their long history. Marcus eventually returned to California, his London adventure having cost him far more than he had bargained for. His experience became a cautionary tale shared among travel bloggers and tourists alike, a reminder that some boundaries exist for serious reasons, and that challenging authority figures who are simply doing their job always carries real risks and consequences. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the familiar black railings. Among them stood Marcus Chen, a travel blogger from California who had built his reputation on getting the most unique shots possible. His followers expected something special from his London trip, and he was determined to deliver. Marcus had spent the previous evening studying the guard rotation schedules and timing their movements. He noticed a small gap in the fence near the side entrance where maintenance crews sometimes entered. The security seemed lighter there, and he calculated he could slip through, grab a selfie with one of the famous red-coated guards, and slip back out before anyone noticed. What Marcus didn't realize was that the royal guards were not the decorative figures he had imagined from movies and postcards. These were active military personnel, highly trained soldiers from elite regiments, like the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Welsh Guards. Their ceremonial duties were just one part of their role in protecting the monarchy and maintaining order. As Marcus squeezed through the gap in his designer jeans and expensive sneakers, his phone already positioned for the perfect shot, he felt a surge of excitement. His followers would go crazy for this content. The guard he approached stood perfectly still, rifle in hand, his tall bearskin hat casting a shadow over his face. Marcus raised his phone, grinning widely. The moment Marcus stepped within the guard's designated zone, everything changed. The soldier's training kicked in immediately. Without breaking his stoic expression or changing his stance, the guard issued a sharp, authoritative warning that echoed across the courtyard. Other guards immediately began moving toward their position, while security cameras swiveled to focus on the scene. Marcus, startled by the guard's commanding voice, stumbled backward, but didn't retreat far enough. He was still within the restricted area, still holding his phone up. The guard took one measured step forward, his military bearing unmistakable, and repeated his warning with even greater authority. By now, palace security personnel were approaching from multiple directions. The consequences came swiftly and decisively. Palace security officers surrounded Marcus within seconds, their radios crackling with coordinated communications. They confiscated his phone immediately, not just deleting the unauthorized photos, but conducting a complete digital investigation of his device. This process took hours and revealed his planned approach, including screenshots of palace layouts he had downloaded. Marcus found himself detained in a windowless room within the palace security complex, where officials explained the serious nature of his actions. He had violated multiple security protocols, trespassed on crown property, and potentially compromised ongoing security measures. The officers were professional but firm, making it clear that his actions could have triggered much more serious responses if circumstances had been different. The legal proceedings that followed were swift but thorough. Marcus was charged with trespassing on royal property, a specific offense under British law that carries more severe penalties than ordinary trespassing. The magistrate who heard his case was unsympathetic to his explanation that he was just trying to create content for social media. His punishment extended far beyond the courtroom. Marcus received a substantial fine that wiped out his travel budget for the next 2 years. More damaging to his career, he was banned from entering any royal property in the United Kingdom for 10 years, making future travel content from Britain nearly impossible. The story of his arrest became news itself, but not the kind of publicity he had hoped for. The incident had lasting consequences for Marcus's travel blogging career. Sponsors began questioning his judgment and professionalism, leading to canceled partnerships and lost income. His follower count actually decreased as people criticized his disrespectful behavior and poor decision-making. Instead of the viral success he had imagined, Marcus became an example of what not to do when visiting royal sites. The palace used Marcus's case as a teaching moment, releasing a statement reminding visitors that the royal guards are active soldiers with real authority to protect the monarchy. The guards themselves never broke character during the entire incident, maintaining their professional demeanor while demonstrating exactly why they have earned respect and fear in equal measure throughout their long history. Marcus eventually returned to California, his London adventure having cost him far more than he had bargained for. His experience became a cautionary tale shared among travel bloggers and tourists alike, a reminder that some boundaries exist for serious reasons, and that challenging authority figures who are simply doing their job always carries real risks and consequences. The summer heat in London had reached unusual levels, and the crowds gathered outside Windsor Castle were larger than normal. Among the tourists and royal watchers stood Jake Morrison, a university student from Australia who was backpacking through Europe on a dare-filled adventure funded by his fraternity brothers back home. Jake had already completed several outrageous challenges during his trip, documenting each one for social media and earning cheers from his friends back in Melbourne. The challenges had started small but gradually escalated, and now his fraternity brothers had issued their most audacious dare yet: streak past a royal guard and post the video online. The dare came with a substantial cash prize that would fund the rest of Jake's European adventure. His friends had already transferred half the money as a good faith gesture, and the other half awaited completion of the challenge. Jake had spent 2 days scouting locations and timing guard rotations, convinced he could pull off the stunt and escape before anyone could stop him. What Jake didn't realize was that Windsor Castle's security systems were far more sophisticated than he imagined. Thermal cameras, motion detectors, and plainclothes security officers monitored every approach to the castle grounds. His reconnaissance activities had already been noted and flagged by security personnel who were trained to identify suspicious behavior. On the chosen day, Jake positioned himself near the main entrance where guards performed their ceremonial duties. He had stripped down to just his underwear in a nearby restroom, planning to remove the final layer and make his run when the moment was right. His phone was set to record, propped against a nearby wall to capture what he believed would be his moment of viral fame. The moment Jake began removing his underwear, multiple things happened simultaneously. Security cameras focused on his position, plainclothes officers began moving toward him, and the nearest royal guard subtly shifted his stance while maintaining his ceremonial posture. What Jake thought was a surprise attack was actually a carefully monitored situation. Jake burst from his hiding spot completely naked, running toward the guard while whooping and shouting. His plan was to sprint past the soldier, grab his phone, and disappear into the crowd before anyone could react. Instead, he found himself facing a guard who was completely prepared for his approach and utterly unimpressed by his antics. The guard's response was swift and decisive. Using techniques learned in military training, the soldier moved with precision and authority, bringing Jake's run to an abrupt and painful end. Jake found himself tackled to the ground with professional efficiency, his naked body pressed against the hot pavement while the guard maintained control of the situation. Within seconds, Jake was surrounded by security personnel who appeared from seemingly nowhere. His naked state made the situation even more humiliating, as tourists pointed, laughed, and took photos that would soon appear on social media platforms around the world. A security blanket was thrown over him, but not before dozens of people had captured his moment of shame. The legal consequences began immediately. Jake was arrested for indecent exposure, disrupting the peace near a royal residence and threatening the security of a protected site. His phone was confiscated, and investigators found not only the planned video but also evidence of his premeditation, including messages with his fraternity friends discussing the dare. At the police station, Jake's situation became even more serious when investigators discovered his tourist visa had specific conditions that prohibited him from engaging in any criminal activity. His arrest for indecent exposure and security Violations meant his visa could be revoked, potentially resulting in deportation and a ban on future entry to the United Kingdom. The court proceedings were swift but thorough. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Jake's explanation that he was completing a fraternity dare, noting that such juvenile behavior showed a complete lack of respect for British law and royal institutions. The magistrate made it clear that foreign tourists who engaged in such behavior would face serious consequences. Jake's punishment was multifaceted and severe. He received a substantial fine, 6 months of community service, and most damaging of all, his visa was indeed revoked. He was given 2 weeks to leave the country and banned from returning to the United Kingdom for 10 years. His European adventure came to an abrupt and expensive end. The personal consequences were equally devastating. The photos and videos of Jake's naked arrest went viral, but not in the way he had hoped. Instead of celebrating his bold stunt, people mocked his stupidity and poor judgment. The images spread far beyond social media, appearing in news articles and comedy shows that used his story as an example of tourist behavior gone wrong. Jake's university learned about the incident through media coverage and launched their own investigation into his conduct while representing their institution abroad. He faced disciplinary action that included suspension from his studies and removal from the fraternity that had dared him to attempt the stunt in the first place. The financial cost was enormous. Jake had to pay for emergency flights home, legal representation, fines, and lost deposits on accommodations and travel plans throughout Europe. The money his fraternity friends had promised never materialized once they saw the negative publicity the incident generated. Years later, Jake's moment of poor judgment continued to follow him. Potential employers conducting background checks found the news stories and photos from his arrest. Dating became difficult when people recognized him from the viral images. His brief moment of naked rebellion had created lifetime consequences he never anticipated. The royal guard involved in stopping Jake received praise for his professional handling of the situation. He had maintained his composure and authority while dealing with an unprecedented situation, demonstrating exactly the kind of training and discipline that makes the royal guards respected worldwide. Jake's humiliation served as a powerful reminder that these soldiers are prepared for anything and will respond appropriately to any threat or disruption, regardless of how ridiculous it might seem. Sarah Mitchell had been passionate about environmental causes since her university days, but her activism had grown increasingly radical over the years. What started as peaceful protests and letter-writing campaigns had evolved into more confrontational tactics that often put her at odds with law enforcement and security personnel. Sarah belonged to a militant environmental group that believed traditional protest methods were too slow and ineffective. They had decided that dramatic, attention-grabbing actions were necessary to force immediate change on climate policy. Their latest target was the royal family, whom they blamed for not using their influence to address environmental issues more aggressively. The group had planned a coordinated protest at multiple royal sites across London, designed to generate maximum media coverage and public attention. Sarah's assignment was Buckingham Palace, where she was supposed to chain herself to the gates, while other members created distractions at nearby locations. The plan seemed simple and straightforward. What Sarah and her fellow activists failed to understand was that royal security protocols had been developed over centuries to deal with exactly these types of disruptions. Every possible scenario had been anticipated, planned for, and practiced repeatedly. Their supposedly clever plan was actually a textbook example of predictable protest behavior. Sarah arrived at the palace early in the morning, dressed in casual clothing to blend in with tourists while carrying a backpack containing chains, locks, and protest banners. She had scouted the location several times and identified what she believed was the perfect spot to secure herself to the railings where she would be visible to both guards and media cameras. Unknown to Sarah, her reconnaissance visits had been noted by plainclothes security officers who routinely monitor individuals showing unusual interest in royal properties. Her group's online communications had also been flagged by intelligence services that track potential threats to royal security, regardless of how politically motivated they might claim to be. As Sarah approached her chosen location and began removing chains from her backpack, she was unaware that multiple security personnel were already moving toward her position. She managed to secure one chain around her wrist and loop it through the railings before the situation escalated dramatically. The nearest royal guard observed Sarah's actions with the trained eye of a soldier who had dealt with protesters many times before. The moment she began chaining herself to royal property, she crossed from legal protest into criminal trespassing and vandalism. The guard's response was immediate and uncompromising. Sarah found herself surrounded by security personnel. Before she could secure the second chain, the guards who approached her were not the ceremonial figures she had imagined, but experienced soldiers with extensive training in crowd control and threat assessment. Their approach was professional but intimidating, and Sarah realized, too, late, that she had seriously underestimated the situation. The process of removing Sarah from the railings was swift and painful. Security officers used specialized tools to cut through her chains, while she was held firmly in place by guards who showed no sympathy for her environmental message. Her protests about police brutality were ignored as officers focused on clearing the security threat she represented. Sarah's arrest was captured by multiple cameras, but not the way she had hoped. Instead of appearing as a brave environmental warrior, she looked like a confused and frightened young woman who had gotten herself into a situation far beyond her control. The footage showed her crying and pleading as she was processed by security, personnel, and police officers. The legal consequences were immediate and severe. Sarah was charged with trespassing on royal property, vandalism, and disrupting the peace near a protected site. The prosecutors made it clear that her political motivations would not serve as a defense for her criminal actions, and that environmental activism did not provide legal cover for breaking the law. During her court appearance, Sarah's lawyer tried to argue that her actions were protected political speech, but the judge was unsympathetic. The magistrate pointed out that Sarah had multiple legal ways to express her environmental concerns without resorting to criminal behavior that threatened royal security and wasted public resources. Sarah's punishment included substantial fines, community service, and most damagingly, a criminal record that would follow her for years. The conviction made it difficult for her to find employment, particularly in the environmental sector where background checks often revealed her arrest for extremist activity. The incident also had consequences for Sarah's activist group. Law enforcement used her arrest as justification for increased surveillance of environmental organizations, making it much harder for the group to organize future protests. Several members distanced themselves from the organization after seeing how Sarah's radical approach had backfired. Sarah's family relationships suffered significantly after her arrest became public knowledge. Her parents, who were conservative, supporters of the royal family, were embarrassed and ashamed of her actions. The incident created lasting rifts that took years to heal, and some family members never fully forgave her for bringing negative attention to their family name. The environmental cause that Sarah claimed to champion was actually hurt by her actions. Media coverage focused on her criminal behavior rather than the climate issues she wanted to highlight, creating negative associations between environmental activism and lawbreaking that damaged the movement's public image. Years later, Sarah reflected on her decision to chain herself to the palace railings as one of the biggest mistakes of her life. The brief moment of attention she received came at the cost of her career prospects, her relationships, and her effectiveness as an activist. She learned too late that confronting royal guards achieves nothing except personal consequences. The guards involved in Sarah's arrest received commendation for their professional handling of the situation. They had followed protocols perfectly, removing a security threat while maintaining the dignity and authority of their positions. Sarah's painful experience became another example of why royal security measures exist and why challenging them always results in failure. Danny Sullivan had been working the tourist circuits around London for nearly a decade, perfecting his skills as a pickpocket who specialized in distracted visitors taking photos and shopping for souvenirs. He had developed an elaborate system of techniques that allowed him to steal wallets, phones, and jewelry, while his victims remained completely unaware of the theft. Danny's success came from his ability to read crowds and identify the most vulnerable targets. He particularly favored areas around major attractions where tourists were focused on sightseeing rather than protecting their belongings. His methods were sophisticated, involving distraction techniques, quick hand movements, and immediate disposal of evidence through a network of accomplices. The changing of the guard ceremonies at Buckingham Palace represented what Danny saw as the perfect opportunity. Hundreds of tourists gathered in tight crowds, all focused on the spectacle of the guards, marching and performing their ceremonial duties. People held cameras high, wallets loosely secured, and paid no attention to their surroundings. What Danny failed to realize was that royal guard ceremonies were among the most heavily monitored events in London. Security cameras captured every angle, plainclothes officers mingled with the crowds, and the guards themselves were trained to observe everything happening around them while maintaining their ceremonial duties. Danny had identified his target. Early in the morning, a wealthy-looking American tourist who was wearing an expensive watch and carrying what appeared to be a high-end camera and designer handbag. The woman was completely absorbed in photographing the guards and seemed oblivious to everything else happening around her. The technique Danny planned to use was one of his most reliable. He would create a small disturbance behind his target, causing people to bump into each other, and in the confusion he would slip his hand into her purse and remove her wallet. The chaos would provide perfect cover, and by the time she realized anything was missing, he would be long gone. As the ceremony began and crowds pressed closer to the railings for better views, Danny made his move. He positioned himself directly behind his target and began creating the minor disturbance that would give him the opportunity he needed. What he didn't notice was that one of the royal guards had been watching his suspicious behavior for several minutes. The guard observing Danny recognized the classic signs of pickpocket activity from his extensive training in crowd control and threat assessment. While maintaining his ceremonial posture and continuing his duties, the soldier had been tracking Danny's movements and preparing to intervene if necessary. The moment Danny's hand entered the tourist's purse, several things happened simultaneously. The royal guard broke from his ceremonial position with military precision, plainclothes officers moved through the crowd toward Danny's location, and security cameras focused on the theft in progress. Danny's perfect plan collapsed in seconds. Danny found himself confronted by a royal guard whose transformation from ceremonial figure to active law enforcement was both immediate and intimidating. The soldier's training kicked in as he detained Danny with professional efficiency, while other security personnel secured the scene and recovered the stolen wallet. The American tourist whose purse had been targeted was initially confused by the sudden commotion, but quickly realized she had been saved from becoming a victim of theft. Her gratitude toward the guard was effusive, and she eagerly provided witness testimony that would be crucial in Danny's prosecution. Danny's arrest was swift and thorough. Police officers who arrived on scene found additional stolen items in his possession, evidence of earlier thefts that morning that had gone undetected. His network of accomplices was quickly identified through security footage, leading to a broader investigation of pickpocket operations around tourist areas. The legal consequences for Danny were severe, particularly because his crime had occurred on royal property during a ceremonial guard event. The prosecutors argued that his actions represented not just theft, but a threat to the security and dignity of royal occasions that drew international attention to Britain. During his court appearance, Danny's extensive criminal record was revealed, showing years of similar offenses that had resulted in increasingly harsh sentences. The judge made it clear that his decision to target tourists during royal ceremonies represented an escalation that would not be tolerated by the justice system. Danny received a 2-year prison sentence, substantially longer than typical pickpocketing cases because of the location and circumstances of his crime. The judge specifically noted that crimes committed during royal events carried additional penalties designed to protect Britain's international reputation and tourist industry. The imprisonment had devastating consequences for Danny's personal life. His girlfriend left him. His apartment was repossessed, and his elderly mother was forced to deal with the shame and embarrassment of having a son in prison for stealing from tourists. The family relationships that had survived his previous arrests finally collapsed completely. Upon his release, Danny discovered that his criminal record had made him virtually unemployable. The high-profile nature of his arrest at a royal ceremony had generated news coverage that appeared in background checks, making it impossible for him to find legitimate work. His life of crime had finally caught up with him permanently. The incident also led to increased security measures at royal ceremonies, with additional plainclothes officers deployed specifically to watch for pickpockets and other criminal activity. Danny's case became a training example for security personnel, demonstrating how quickly criminals could be detected and apprehended when proper protocols were followed. The royal guard who had spotted Danny's criminal activity and intervened to stop the theft received official recognition for his alertness and professional response. His ability to maintain ceremonial duties while simultaneously conducting security surveillance was highlighted as exemplary performance that other guards should emulate. Danny's attempted theft during the changing of the guard ceremony became a cautionary tale shared among London's criminal community. Word spread quickly that royal events were not safe targets for criminal activity, and many thieves began avoiding areas where royal guards were present, knowing that these soldiers were far more observant and capable than they appeared. Years later, Danny continued to struggle with the consequences of his decision to target tourists during a royal ceremony. His brief moment of greed had cost him his freedom, his relationships, his home, and his future prospects. The royal guard who stopped him had demonstrated that even ceremonial duties could not prevent these soldiers from protecting the public and upholding the law with decisive action. Kevin Walsh had built his entire online persona around increasingly elaborate pranks that pushed the boundaries of social acceptability. His YouTube channel had millions of subscribers who eagerly awaited each new video, and the advertising revenue had made him wealthy enough to quit his regular job and focus on content creation full-time. The success had gone to Kevin's head, convincing him that he was untouchable and that any publicity was good publicity. His pranks had evolved from harmless jokes to increasingly dangerous and illegal activities that often resulted in police involvement. Each arrest or controversy only seemed to increase his subscriber count and income. Kevin's management team had been pushing him to create content that would generate international attention and expand his audience beyond English-speaking countries. They suggested targeting iconic British institutions that would be instantly recognizable to viewers worldwide, and the Royal Guards seemed like the perfect subject for his next viral video. The prank Kevin planned was elaborate and expensive, involving multiple cameras, professional lighting equipment, and a team of assistants who would help document every moment. His idea was to approach a royal guard while wearing an identical uniform and pretend to be a replacement guard reporting for duty, creating confusion and hopefully getting a reaction from the real soldier. Kevin had invested thousands of dollars in creating an authentic-looking replica of the Royal Guard uniform, complete with the distinctive red coat, black bearskin hat, and ceremonial sword. His research team had studied guard protocols and timing to identify the perfect moment to execute their prank without causing too much genuine disruption. What Kevin's team failed to understand was that impersonating a member of the Royal Guard was not just a prank, but a serious criminal offense under British military law. The uniforms, insignia, and weapons of the Royal Guards are protected symbols that cannot be replicated or worn by unauthorized individuals under any circumstances. Kevin's plan also overlooked the sophisticated security measures that protected royal properties. His team's reconnaissance activities, equipment deliveries, and suspicious behavior around sensitive locations had been monitored and reported by intelligence services that took potential threats to royal security very seriously. On the day of the planned prank, Kevin and his team arrived at Windsor Castle with their equipment and fake uniform, confident that they would capture viral content that would make them rich and famous worldwide. Kevin changed into his replica guard uniform in a nearby restroom, practicing his serious military expression in the mirror. The moment Kevin stepped onto royal property wearing the unauthorized uniform, multiple security protocols were activated. Palace security officers immediately recognized the fake uniform and moved to intercept him before he could approach any real guards. Kevin's brief moment of excitement turned into panic as he realized how seriously authorities were taking his prank. Kevin found himself surrounded by security personnel who showed no amusement at his elaborate joke. The officers who detained him were trained military personnel who treated the impersonation of a royal guard as a direct threat to the monarchy and national security. Kevin's protests that it was just a prank were ignored completely. The arrest was swift and professional, with Kevin's fake uniform being confiscated as evidence and his entire film crew being detained for questioning. The expensive cameras and equipment he had brought to document his viral moment were seized by authorities conducting their investigation into what they treated as a serious security breach. Kevin's legal troubles began immediately and escalated. Quickly, he was charged with impersonating a member of the armed forces, fraud, trespassing on royal property, and conspiracy to commit acts threatening national security. The prosecutors made it clear that his intent to create entertainment content would not serve as a defense for his serious crimes. During his court appearances, Kevin's lawyer tried to argue that his actions were protected as comedy and free expression, but the judge was completely unsympathetic. The magistrate explained that impersonating royal guards was equivalent to impersonating police officers or military personnel, crimes that were prosecuted to the full extent of the law regardless of motivation. Kevin's punishment was severe and comprehensive. He received an 18-month prison sentence, substantial fines that wiped out years of YouTube revenue, and a permanent criminal record that would follow him forever. The judge specifically noted that social media fame did not provide immunity from criminal prosecution. The imprisonment destroyed Kevin's online career completely. His YouTube channel was suspended while he was in prison, causing him to lose millions of subscribers and all his advertising revenue. Sponsors abandoned him immediately when news of his arrest spread, and his management team dissolved their contracts to avoid association with his criminal behavior. Kevin's personal life collapsed during his incarceration. His girlfriend left him, his family distanced themselves from the embarrassment he had caused, and his friends abandoned him when they realized his criminal behavior could affect their own reputations and careers. His moment of viral fame had cost him everything that mattered. Upon his release, Kevin discovered that his criminal record made it virtually impossible to rebuild his career or find legitimate employment. Background checks revealed his conviction for impersonating military personnel, a crime that employers found particularly disturbing. His dreams of returning to content creation were permanently shattered. The incident became a landmark case that was used to educate other social media creators about the serious legal consequences of pranks targeting government institutions or military personnel. Kevin's story was shared as a warning about how quickly comedy content could cross into criminal territory with devastating consequences. The royal guards, who were the intended targets of Kevin's prank, never actually encountered him, as security personnel intercepted him before he could approach them. However, the incident led to enhanced security protocols for detecting and preventing similar attempts to impersonate or harass royal guards in the future. Kevin's expensive replica uniform became evidence in court proceedings and was eventually destroyed by authorities to prevent others from using it for similar criminal purposes. The thousands of dollars he had spent creating authentic-looking military regalia became worthless, representing just one of many financial losses from his failed prank. Years later, Kevin continued to struggle with the consequences of his decision to target the royal guards for entertainment purposes. His brief attempt at viral fame had resulted in permanent damage to his life, career, and relationships. The royal institution he had thought would be an easy target for comedy had instead demonstrated the serious consequences that await anyone who challenges their authority and dignity.